Hello, Wall Street bitch. We are live, and you still do not have your microphone ready at all. That was quick.
Can you hear me?
Yep. So today we have Paul Schatzkin on again.
Schatzky.
He's the author of a few different books about what's his name, Townsend Brown. We had him on. This is episode 28, I believe. We also had him on in episode 25.
Yeah, he's quite a famous author, and Jesse Michaels just actually put out a very interesting documentary, which he was prominently featured in.
So who exactly is Jesse Michaels? He's the American Alchemy guy? Like, what's his deal?
Yeah, he has a really cool show on YouTube, basically focuses on UFOs and strange phenomenon, but he really stays in the lane of scientific fact, and he does his research.
This is Jesse Michaels you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. He's actually the nephew of Paul Schatzkin, who's a very famous psychologist. He has that Netflix documentary around about him called Stutz, I think, made by Jonah Hill. You know that?
The therapist.
Yeah, the therapist. Yeah. So Jesse Michaels had Stutz on his last episode, and they talked about Stutz. A myriad of cool things.
It's very interesting. If I put these on, I can't see the bigger monitor we have at all.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, so you have no idea what it looks like?
No.
So you...
Yeah, I never can see that.
It's kind of not great.
Why? That's good.
How do you know what? Oh, well, we're not going to live stream, so you won't be able to see it at all.
That's fine.
On the phone, I guess.
Do you want to just look at yourself?
Well, you won't see Paul when he joins.
I'll see Paul's heart.
Okay. Why don't you dive into this card called Project Man Cave?
Yes, I was walking today, and this very nervous young gentleman came up to me and gave me this card called Project Man Cave, and it was very intriguing.
Friends await.
I looked into it. It's a app for guys to make friends. And I'm very intrigued because they have these these quests that they set up, and it's like 5 guys you meet up at a bar and you do something. So I don't know, Hans. I think maybe we should join.
Interesting. Well, we could attend an event, maybe bring some microphones, record some people.
Yeah, so look up Project Man Cave, Epic Friends Await, if you're interested.
Awesome.
But it is true that there's a lot of young men struggling to make friends out there. And if you want to meet a lot of other young men who can't make friends, then Project Man Cave is for you.
Yeah. Men have the highest suicide rate, so it's important we take care of each other as men.
Ring the bell. Ring the bell for that.
I was in Texas, got this cowbell. Curious how that'll play back in the sound, but it is from the 2023 World Pro Ski Tour Championships.
We're gonna ring it every time we bring awareness to men's rights.
That wasn't good enough.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Men's rights awareness cowbell.
Mm-hmm,
that's what you can call that.
Today was Greek Independence Day, which is very important.
If you Google Greek Independence Day though and see what actually comes up.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, I can't Google right. You're the Google guy tonight.
Okay, I'll Google it.
Google that.
Yeah, it was all over the news because Greek equity is really important.
Because when I Google it, it comes up as Monday, March 25th, and the date of this recording is Thursday, April 4th.
Maybe they're just celebrating it today?
Maybe, it's different in the U.S., but, Greeks are always independent in the U.S. I don't understand. Yeah, even if I type in
what do you mean Greeks were always independent in the U.S.? It's about Greece.
But if
it's Greece independent.
If you look it up, it says Monday, March 25th.
Yeah. That's Greek. That's the day they recognize probably the independence of Greece.
But Biden gave a speech on it today.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they're doing it today. That's weird.
Hey,
settle down.
Yeah, so that's what I am confused about. If we could get to the bottom of why the speech was essentially a week late, like a week and a half late.
It's probably because he had Transgender Day and all that really important stuff.
Yeah, what other days preceded it? Or maybe because the Greek guy was visiting. Looks like Donald Trump did it too.
Wait, really?
Yeah, here's a picture of Trump.
Why does he have like a weird rabbi next to him?
I'll share the screen really quick. Yeah. Well,
that's not from today.
Well, no, but this is like from when.
From when he did it last.
Yeah, when he did it last. You can see here.
Yeah.
It says Monday, March 25th. I don't know. I just don't get why they celebrated on April 4th.
Well, if you have any Greeks out there, or if we do have any Greeks out there listening, we support you.
And if you could give us an explanation, we would support that too.
Yeah, we know you've been through a lot of struggle. So we're here.
It looks like Paul's here. I'm going to take a minute break. I think the pizza may be here. This will be edited out.
Cool. Nice. Yeah. Turn. Oh, this person like my tweet. My body is my possession.
Really make him wait it out.
There we got 7 minutes. Slice pizza. Tiger, stop.
But open in with that. That's what he sent in an email.
You gonna play it after?
I mean, I could. Should I? Or?
Yeah. That'd be a great way to open.
Welcome, Paul, and we are live. We're not live streaming today, but I thought we'd start by playing your new video, and then we could talk about that when we post the recording later tonight or tomorrow.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
all right,
thanks for coming
guys.
back on.
Hey, Paul. Hey. How are you?
Well, I'm great. How are you?
Good,
awesome. Good. Doing great.
Good.
Yeah,
welcome
good
back.
To see you.
I'm glad we put this together again.
Yeah. Can you see the video, Paul, or can only us? Now it says from the alpha, showing the monkey smashing the bones of another monkey. To the omega. Yeah, for people just listening, dude.
Oh, sure. Woo!
Hold down PC. Questions.
Well, first, let's introduce Paul. Everyone, this is Paul Schatzkin. I'm pronouncing that correctly, right?
You are pronouncing it correctly. Go to the head of the class.
Yeah.
All right, good. This is our second conversation with him. Highly recommend you go to our first one. We talked a lot about Townsend Brown, a lot of cool stuff like that. This episode, we're going to dive a little bit deeper, maybe delve into some other exciting areas. But we wanted to start with that video. Paul, can you, first of all, I love the video because it's very thought-provoking. But could you give us some background on that and why you made it? What thoughts what inspired you to put it together?
Well, honestly, what inspired me was simply looking at that footage. And I'm going to give a talk at a conference. It's actually called the Cosmic Summit in the middle of June in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I'm beginning to just gather the material that I'm going to present. I'm tentatively calling the presentation Back to the Future or A Glimpse of the Future, which is a reference to that last scene in Back to the Future, which if you can pull it up from my channel, you might also show, because there's a couple of elements in that scene that speak directly to the work that I've been doing over the last several decades.
Wow.
The introduction of fusion energy when the DeLorean comes back from the future, the fact that the time machine is a capacitor, which is what Townsend Brown was working on, and then just the fact that the character's name is Emmett, E-M-E-T-T Brown.
Oh, interesting.
So I have been thinking a lot lately, particularly since seeing Oppenheimer last summer, how we have been focused on the most destructive elements of what we learned in the last century in Einstein's cosmology, the papers that he released starting in 1905 and then with general relativity in 1915, that we've been so entirely focused on the destructive capabilities that we've lost track of the really creative capabilities, which we begin with our ability to look at each other, which comes from the very first paper that Einstein wrote in 1905 on the photoelectric effect, which the first guy that I wrote about, Philo Farnsworth, used to create video, which is how you and I can see each other. So while I was gathering the material for this presentation that I'm going to do, I came across that footage. The scene is actually called The Dawn of Man. It's the first 8 minutes of Stanley Kubrick's epic 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, okay. Wall Street bitch thought it was you in an ape suit. It's like Paul's going to emerge.
I'm flattered that you recognized me. Thank you. And I've been looking at all this footage also of nuclear bomb explosions. And so when I went back and I looked at that footage, I have been making the case, first of all, that Kubrick was dead on with this idea that a species on this planet was seeded with superior intelligence. And that over millennia, we have been seeing what this species could do with that. That it began with, in that instance, in that cinematic case, the ape discovers the bone, and then he can beat his neighbors with it.
Right.
And the case that I've kind of been making, and I realize that it's either idealistic or pedantic or moralistic, whatever you want to call it, is that millennia later, we're still basically apes beating each other with clubs.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I love
History repeats itself.
I love what you said earlier. We've the human race has been focused solely on how destructive we can be.
Yeah.
And as opposed to how creative we can get, which is really interesting.
And we certainly have gotten very creative with this, but we went. Our attention seems to be focused on how we can eliminate life on the planet. And you have to wonder, would a more enlightened species have perhaps gone more directly to what Einstein said to Philo Farnsworth in 1948 was the good part of his theories, which was generating electricity from controlled nuclear fusion, which we still haven't really figured out. But maybe Farnsworth did, which is what drew me into that story and into all this material in the first place.
Paul, just to go back to Stanley Kubrick, I'm curious if you think that he staged the first or filmed the staging of the moon landing, or if the moon landing was staged.
I absolutely do not.
Okay, because that's a conspiracy. I think is that he filmed it, right?
No, I'm reasonably certain, only allowing for a minuscule percentage that I could be wrong, that we made that trip.
That's kind of how I feel about it too.
Yeah.
So to go back to the Cosmic Summit, I'm curious. Can you speak to that a bit? I see Randall Carlson's going to be there. What's the overarching topic that you guys are discussing?
Well, I'm still getting a handle on it because I've had some exposure to some of the scientific material that's going to be presented, and let's just say charitably that I'm yet to be persuaded of its validity. And I've seen a lot of stuff that I haven't. I don't. Maybe it's just over my ability to comprehend. But it covers a wide spectrum of things. There's going to be a lot of talks. Now, I'm not familiar with Randall Carlson specifically, but I know a lot of what they're going to look at are the evidences that there have been previous civilizations on Earth that have had advanced technologies that, for whatever reason, maybe they had nuclear weapons and. The way that nuclear weapons will go. So it's going to cover everything from that to futuristic technologies like I'm going to talk about, the things that may be available to us now. One thing that I'm interested to see is what they're calling the thunderstorm generator, which is supposed to be...
I heard about that.
Yeah, and I haven't figured out enough about that to make sense of it either. So I got a couple of months yet to figure out exactly where I'm going to fit in, but it covers a wide range of material.
That's interesting. I might buy a pass to this because I'm fascinated with the ancient technology, that whole realm. Randall Carlson is really into the Younger Dryas theory, how there was a cataclysmic event that wiped out a more advanced population of humans, and we sort of reset and developed in a different direction. That's sort of his realm, but it's cool that you're focusing more on the future.
I'm focusing on the things that I have learned from the work that I've done that suggest what is real to me, what is realistically possible with the exposure to technologies that we've had over the past 60 to 100 years.
So can you like very, very, very high level, how would you start a conversation around that topic? Like what type of technologies are you thinking of or talking about right now?
Well, as the video that you showed says at the very end, I'm talking specifically about the two things that I've been writing about, which are fusion energy and gravity control.
Interesting.
Now, I have pulled the video from the Back to the Future movies. Do you remember how the first Back to the Future ends?
Not particularly.
I was also rewatching.
I was also wondering to rewind if you could just give like a quick, like very like layman's terms definition of both fusion energy and gravity control.
Okay,
like
I'm going to do it this way because this is what I've been working on over the last couple of days.
Yeah,
this is, and I'm not sure if it's a good approach, but I'll experiment with you guys and you let me know. I'm experimenting with the idea of the missing fourths. There are aspects of technology where there are 4 versions of each one, and we've only got 3 of them, and the 4th is missing.
And this is a repeating pattern that you see?
Well, in this case, in this limited case. So the first thing that we'll address is what are called the 4 fundamental forces or the 4 interactions. So these are electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and gravity. Now, there's an argument in some circles as to whether or not gravity is a force. It certainly felt to me like a force. That day I tripped on the pavement and fell on my face.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got those 4 fundamental forces. So electromagnetism, we pretty much figured out our way to using it over 100 years ago, in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century. Faraday in the 1830s. The first manifestation in technology was the telegraph in 1844, and then Maxwell's equations in 1865. So we've had electromagnetism wired that long.
Yeah.
The weak nuclear force and the strong nuclear force. The weak nuclear force is essentially radiation, the energy that's released when atoms begin to decay, and the strong nuclear force is the E equals mc squared force that holds the protons of an atom together. They are like charged, they are positively charged, they should repel each other, but the nuclear force is strong enough to hold them together. Now, we'll come back to that because there's 4 versions of that as well. So we have control of electromagnetism, we have the weak force, we have the strong force. That's 3 of the 4. The 4th is gravity, and we've never figured out how to control gravity. Or at least we haven't publicly.
And weak nuclear force is how we date the world, or how we date things, right?
Just think of it as radiation, essentially, because there are weak forces that come out of atoms under certain conditions.
Yeah.
Okay.
So gamma rays, X-rays, these are all kind of the weak nuclear force. Okay. So now those are the 4 fundamental interactions. Now we'll go back to the subset of the strong nuclear force. There are 4 ways to release that strong nuclear force that holds the nucleus of an atom together. 2 of them are explosive, and 2 of them are controlled. 2 of them involve splitting atoms, nuclear fission, and 2 of them involve fusing atoms, nuclear fusion. So that's getting atoms in close enough proximity to each other that they become a heavier element. Like hydrogen becomes helium, and the difference in the mass of the helium atom is less than the mass of the two hydrogen atoms when you started out with. That's given off as energy according to E equals mc squared. So bear with me again, because the first thing we mastered was controlled fission with Fermi's pile in 1940. The second thing we controlled was explosive fission with the atomic bombs, as seen in the movie Oppenheimer. The third thing we figured out was explosive fusion in the form of a hydrogen bomb, and we still haven't figured out the fourth one, which is controlled nuclear fusion. Now, fusion is the reaction that we have discovered is at the heart of the sun and every star in the heavens. And I like to say, when God himself was thinking, I think I want a universe, how will I light it? He said, I know, I'll take two hydrogen atoms and I'll slam them together, and that will give off heat and light. And that is what drives the universe. Let me finish. The trick of controlled nuclear fusion is that you are essentially trying to bottle a star. What kind of container can you put a star in that doesn't either melt the container or extinguish the star? That's the riddle of nuclear fusion that science has been trying to solve for 60 or 70 years. And I contend that Philo Farnsworth found the answer to the riddle in the 1950s and 60s and took the secret to his grave.
Really?
Yep.
So who was Philo Farnsworth? I know nothing about him. And why do you think he took that secret to his grave? Is it a revolutionary destructive secret? I would think it would be a secret that would give us access to unlimited free energy, right?
Yeah, and there's a whole conversation to have about what actually happened in his laboratory in Fort Wayne in the mid-1960s when he was developing these systems. And I have photos of them, and I've gotten testimony from a lot of the people that worked with him. He died in 1972. I didn't meet the family until 1975. And when I met them, they were very circumspect and not readily willing to talk about that period of his life. But let's come back to that, because
really,
we need to know the name Philo T. Farnsworth, because his is one of the most pivotal names in what I would consider all of human evolution.
Wow, really?
Okay. Absolutely. Because what has been lost to history because of 80 to 100 years of corporate public relations is that Farnsworth did with Einstein's photoelectric effect what Oppenheimer did with the formula of E equals mc squared.
Wow. Is that Philo Farnsworth with a PH or F for Philo?
It's Philo. T as in Taylor was his middle name, Farnsworth. And I should say here that there were two Philo Farnsworths in my life. The boy who invented television. Now that's shameless self-promotion. Book number one here is The Boy Who Invented Television.
We talked about him on last time. Yeah, okay. I remember.
A little bit.
We did.
Yeah, got to it towards the end.
Sorry about that.
And that was my introduction to all this. If I hadn't heard about Philo Farnsworth in 1973, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation now. And if Philo Farnsworth hadn't invented video in the 1920s, this would be a phone call.
Wow.
Okay. So the story there goes like this. First, we'll start. Did I ask you last time? Do you know that my rhetorical question in these conversations is, do you know what Einstein was awarded the Nobel Prize for in 1920?
The theory of relativity, right?
No.
Okay, I'm not sure then.
Okay. So Einstein had in 1905 what we call the Annus Mirabilis, where he released 4 seminal epic breakthrough papers of scientific theory that turned the whole world of science and physics on its ear. So the first one, the very first paper he released in 1905, in March of 1905, and it's got this long name that I can't rattle off the top of my head, but it was the articulation and quantification of the photoelectric effect, which is the phenomenon where when light strikes certain materials, electrons are emitted. So it is the process by which light becomes electricity.
Interesting.
And that is the seed of all the video technology on the planet. It's the most pervasive appliance in the history of appliances. And of course, we have no knowledge of where it came from. We just figure it's always been there, like God and cheeseburgers.
Yeah.
But it was predicated on the photoelectric effect. Now, one of the things that's interesting to me about all of this is that Einstein released those cosmological breakthrough papers in 1905. I've been writing about Philo Farnsworth, who was born in 1906, and Townsend Brown, who was born in 1905. So they all grew up in the world that had never not known relativity and quantum mechanics. So they had a very different perspective on how the universe worked than those that went before them. And that is particularly evident when we talk about the evolution of television or video. So a little bit of background here, and this is what I learned over the course of many years diving into this, because I was intrigued with Philo Farnsworth, and we'll back up later and I'll tell you why. But so we're into the early decades of the 20th century now. Electrical communications begins with the telegraph in 1844. What hath God wrought? We'll find out soon enough. And then Maxwell's equations, and then Marconi or Tesla develop radio. Edison develops the phonograph. Edison and I forget the name of the French guy's names, come up with film. All these technologies are beginning to emerge. And it's easy to imagine at that point that at some point they will all combine in some way so that it's possible to send motion pictures through the air. So we're going to have the merger eventually of like movies and television. And that was actually the approach that they used for several decades. It was an electromechanical approach that was originally developed by a German named Paul Nipkow in, I think, the 1880s. And what Nipkow came up with was a disc, and the disc had a spiral of perforations around it, so that as each hole went past a photocell, a different strip of light would pass the photocell, sending fluctuating electrical current from the photocell. Mm-hmm. So imagine this contraption with a spinning wheel trying to transmit moving images through the air. I've if you want, maybe later I can steer you towards some footage where you can see that technology was never going to work. It was just insufficient to produce the kind of resolution like we enjoy today because it couldn't go fast enough.
So it would essentially be like extremely blurry, or you wouldn't be able to actually.
Even at its very best, it was very blurry. And there was one guy in England, his name was John Logie Baird, who actually began transmitting images across the Atlantic in like 1926. And so if you go to England and you ask somebody who invented television, they'll tell you it was John Logie Baird. But what John Logie Baird invented was kind of a dinosaur. And even Logie Baird eventually had to take a patent from Farnsworth, but that's farther down the trail. So
interesting.
So just imagine, if you will, for context, that people are now growing up in the 1910s and in that era who have exposure to the theory of relativity and specifically in this case the photoelectric effect, which Einstein articulated, and they're thinking about how can we send motion pictures through the air. Now enter this fellow named Philo T. Farnsworth, who was born in Utah in 1906. His family moves to Rigby, Idaho in 1918 when he was about 11 years old. And that was the first place he encountered electricity for himself. He had read about it, but he had never seen it. And he immediately proved himself to be one of its great masters. And he says to his father at one point, they've been reading, the family was relatively poor, but I think they had a phonograph, and they had what everybody had in those days, which was the Sears catalog, which was the universal wish book. People would get the Sears catalog and go through it and say, I wish I had that, and I wish I had that. Yeah. And young Philo, he sees all these things which are obviously inventions, and he says to his father, he expresses his wish, recognizing the destiny in this. He expresses it to his father this way. He says, "I hope that I was born an inventor."
Wow.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah. And then as he begins learning more, he encounters it was one night in this farm in Rigby, Idaho, where he discovers a trove of old science and electrical magazines. That he first encounters the idea of moving pictures that can fly through the air, and probably sees an illustration of the mechanical devices that were trying to do it at the time. And I think the way the story was told to me was, first, he's set on being an inventor. And second, he decides that television would be a good thing to invent to launch a career as an inventor.
Is that what he called it? To television? Did
Yeah,
he come up with that name, or was
it had a lot of names? Radioscope, teleramophone. There were a lot of names, but I think it was around that time that the word television began to settle into the vernacular.
And his invention is building off of Einstein's.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I just want to make sure we're getting the timeline right.
Was he looking at sketches of like Da Vinci sketches, or what kind of sketches was he looking at?
What do you mean sketches?
I'm sorry. How did Da Vinci get into the conversation? I missed that.
Well, because I think Da Vinci had an old projector.
Hello?
I feel like sketch.
What were you asking about Da Vinci?
Da Vinci had an old projector sketch, and you're talking about him looking at sketches to create the TV.
I don't. That's not part of this story.
Okay.
Yeah. So my sense of things now is that Philo Farnsworth, even as a young age, had a sense of how the universe works that he got from Einstein, including the photoelectric effect, that gave him a much different mindset from the people who had gone before. And so he must have learned about the photoelectric effect. He learns about cathode ray tubes, which demonstrate the ability of electrons to hit a surface and turn that surface into light. He learns that electrons can be deflected by magnets. And he's thinking about all these things one day in the summer of 1921 when he's 14 years old. And the story is, he is working behind what's called a disc harrow, which is a kind of a plowing machine, plowing a field, getting it ready for planting or just turning the soil. And he looks behind him to see his afternoon's work. And in an instant, he is struck with the idea of bouncing electrons back and forth in a vacuum tube with a photoelectric surface on the front, and using the electrons that come off that photoelectric surface as the source of an electrical stream that is manipulated by the magnets bouncing it back and forth to create the electrical stream that can be reproduced in a cathode ray tube on the other end. That is the instant when television or video arrived on the planet in the brain of a 14-year-old boy.
He was 14. So he already deeply understood all of these scientific concepts.
Yeah. Now, that conception was a breakthrough in what mankind could do with quantum forces.
That's insane.
He's eliminated all the mechanical parts, and all he's dealing with is electromagnetism, electrons, and the photoelectric effect. It is the pure expression of quantum mechanics in a vacuum tube. And here we are, all focused on Oppenheimer because he could blow up the world. And look what this kid did with the same essential cosmology. Now, here's how you can tell what a breakthrough it was. Because he got that idea in 1921. He drew a sketch for his high school science teacher sometime probably in the spring of 1922. And then he kept that idea in his head, and he learned everything he could to try to develop the idea in just a raw psychic form in his head. He sat on that idea for 5 or 6 years. 5 or 6 years on
Really?
the hottest idea in technology in the early 20th century. And nobody
Interesting.
else came up with the same idea.
That's crazy. He was
That's
probably
how
self-conscious
far.
about it, you know?
Oh, he was. He was very self-conscious about it. And he was very careful
Isn't
who he would discuss it with.
Yeah, wow.
So in 1926, he gets a job at a community chest campaign in Salt Lake City. And one night after working late, the guy, his name is George Everson, who's come in from California to run this community chest campaign. He's a kind of a financier with contacts in the financial circles in California. They're all sitting around after work one day having a bull session, and George Everson, this financier, asks young Phil Farnsworth. He's dropped the O from his name now. We call him Phil from this point on. And he asks Phil, what is he planning to do? And Phil says, well, I have this idea for television. And George immediately says, television, what's that? Because the idea was not popular at the time. And when Phil explains it to him, he says, I've been thinking I could write it up for Popular Science and maybe get $100 for it.
Oh, my God.
But a colleague of George prevails on him to take a closer look at the idea. One thing leads to another. Farnsworth gets some seed money. This is so far ahead of the systems of angel and venture capital that we have in place now. But he got some seed money in a laboratory in 1927 in San Francisco through George and his contacts. And he moves to San Francisco. He files patents in January of 1927.
So now he filed patents for all of this?
Sorry?
He filed patents for all of this and everything?
Are we froze? You guys are froze.
Are we frozen? Hello? Can you see us?
Yeah, I see. I saw your left hand go up.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you too.
Okay.
Yeah. A momentary.
Sorry, I was just asking. I was just asking if he filed patents for all of this technology.
That's right. And that's where the story gets really interesting because there's a whole patent history here. But he files the patents in 1927.
Okay.
And the patents were granted. It takes a while for patents to go through the whole system. But the point is that when he filed the patents in 1927, 6 full years after he got the first idea, still nobody has come up with that idea.
That's crazy.
And I've got footage on my YouTube channel of in 1977, some of Farnsworth's colleagues, he only died 5 years earlier. Some of his colleagues are still alive. And we all got together and we actually made a recreation of the equipment that they had built in 1927 that produced the first electronic video image so we can see what it looks like. And all it was a fuzzy line on a purple screen.
Wow.
But it proved the principle that information, intelligence could be transmitted from the bottom of one bottle to the bottom of another with no moving parts. And that is the foundation of all the video technology on the planet today.
Wow.
That's
incredible.
What killed Farnsworth?
Well, the family like to say he died of a broken heart.
Hopefully we're not actually frozen here.
Yeah. He had a lot of health issues later in his life. There were many stressors in his life, particularly starting in the mid-1930s when a large company called the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, ever heard of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, RCA was determined that it was going to introduce television to the world. And they did everything they could to appropriate Farnsworth's patents throughout the 1930s.
Wow.
Now, RCA was a company. It was actually spawned as a government monopoly after World War I, because during World War I, the government assumed all of the radio patents that belonged to Marconi and other companies so that the military could have control of radio communications during World War I.
Propaganda.
And then after the war, they spun them off and formed this thing called the Radio Corporation and turned all those patents over to the Radio Corporation. And then a man named David Sarnoff rises to the top of the Radio Corporation. He did create NBC, but he was very aggressive in a practice rather, that the Radio Corporation was formed to collect patent royalties, not to pay them.
Interesting.
And they used that policy to steamroll just about every inventor who ever came up with anything in radio throughout the 1920s.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on science and invention today, and I think this ties into it because and I don't know much, but it seems like we've created an environment that discourages, because of corporations and politics, that discourages and steamrolls, and everyone is scared to sort of come up with new things. Do you see, like, since I don't know, the 40s or the 50s, do you see that the world of science and, I guess, invention has sort of gone in a weird direction or totally been stopped because of politics and corporations? Like, is that part of the reason that there haven't been any major scientific breakthroughs in 50, 60 years?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about that in the last time, and that's kind of a separate, larger, almost metaphysical, spiritual subject.
Yeah, we don't have to go fully into it.
But I think that you've identified a kind of a weakness in the realm of technology, because when the patent system was first introduced, it was well before the emergence of the grand corporate trusts, which have in fact taken over much of the development of technology in the world.
I see.
And so I would not argue with you that it has become very difficult for an independent inventor, like you had with somebody like Edison, or in the 19th century, to get a foothold in the 20th or 21st century. And honestly, I would tell you that looking deeper into the patent history of television and Farnsworth versus RCA is kind of the pivotal point where you see the end of the primacy of the lone inventor and the emergence of the corporate laboratory.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to where we were. He's getting steamrolled by this company.
Right.
How does this lead into the portion of his life that is sort of mysterious? And you claim that he might have invented something that has not been shown to the world yet. And what is that technology?
Well, now we're talking about the nuclear fusion process that Farnsworth developed starting in the early 1950s. Now, mind you, as we get into the period around World War II, and we're beginning to actually do things with the strong nuclear force. And so we begin with the Fermi pile in 1940, which was part of the Manhattan Project. And then we get the first atomic bombs, and then we get Teller's H bombs. Those are 3 of the 4 manifestations of the strong nuclear force. Farnsworth, for whatever reason, starts thinking about the 4th one. And that's the controlled nuclear fusion, the star in a jar. And so I'm just trying to think what's the best point to enter here. I want to first introduce this kind of broad idea that we're dealing with a mindset here that is possessed of a different cosmology in a different way from most people. That is what led him to the conception of television.
But was he dyslexic by chance? Because Einstein
I don't believe so. I have no evidence. There's never been anything said to that effect.
Because Einstein was, and apparently
the universe with great clarity that first gave him a 6-year head start on the advent of electronic video.
Yeah, that's so curious. Continue.
And then put him on the front lines of everything that mankind learned how to do with what we're calling quantum forces throughout the 1930s. He was the tip of the spear in that work throughout the 1930s. And there are sad tales in here, particularly during the 1930s so he's got this. We'll go back to 1927 when I described for you the fuzzy line on the purple screen. He could almost see in an instant everything he needed to do to get that to where it could show up in our living rooms. He just
Wow.
had this capacity. And,
Wow.
and I've been reading the book recently because I'm going to release an audiobook version of it finally in a month or so.
Awesome.
And I came across a passage where one of his colleagues that worked with him in the lab said that Phil Farnsworth actually reached the point where he was inventing things every day and didn't even realize he was inventing things. He was just so far out ahead that he was finding these solutions to the problems that were coming up in the process of refining video, electronic video, so it could be delivered to the marketplace and realize its commercial potential, that he was spinning things off left and right. And among the things that he spun off were the basic technology that became the electron microscope and some of the technology that was fundamental to radar.
Wow.
But because he was so underfunded, he couldn't file patents on those things, and those things got away from him. But those are the
Really?
kinds of discoveries that he's making just because he sees things in such very practical terms, the way most of us see, I don't know, cars going by on the street or something. I can't think of a good analogy. But he had a
Right,
very
right.
clear view of all these inner workings. Now, the
Fascinating.
genesis of what we're going to get to in the 1950s is in the mid-1930s, when he has an extreme need to amplify the signal that's coming out of his television camera tubes. It's a very weak signal, and he needs a way of amplifying that signal without producing a lot of noise in the signal so that he can get a clear image. And in, I think, 1935, he invented a super amplifier tube called the multipactor that used something that he had observed in his work. And this is the recurring theme here. He sees things and he learns things and he goes
Sorry,
into
Paul, the multi-pactor? The multi-what?
the multipactor tube, multipactor.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers at my disposal, but so what was unique about the multipactor tube was most amplification in those days worked by heating, sending electrical current into the filament of a vacuum tube, heating the filament, spinning off electrons, and then amplifying them within that tube. It was what they called a hot cathode.
Okay.
And what the multipactor was, it was a miracle because it had electrodes on either end and they were cold cathodes. But by implementing something with radio frequencies to bounce these electrons back and forth after each other, it got enormous levels of amplification. I think it was a 1 followed by like 26 zeros. The 1 to the 26th. It was unheard of.
Wow.
Yeah. So that gave him the ability to get a stronger signal out of his television systems as they were developing. And just as an aside here, he was ready to deliver television to the marketplace single-handedly by 1934, but we'll come back to that or not later. But he learned a lot from the multipactor tube, and in sometime in the period between about 36 and 38, he experimented with a spherical version of it. So it was a cylinder with a cathode on either end. And I've got a picture somewhere, and maybe later I can send you some of these files and you can throw them into the video if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
So imagine a glass ball with curved metal plates inside of it. And those are the electrodes. And when he fired that up to high voltages, something unusual formed in the center of the tube. It was a blue glowing light of what we call now a plasma, which is a kind of a nebulous electrical field where the protons are separated from the electrons and it's ionized and it doesn't really have a charge, but it's a seething cauldron of electrical charges called a plasma.
Is it like a state of matter? Because I've heard this word plasma. Okay,
yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's considered the fourth state of matter. So you go from solid to liquid to gas to plasma.
Okay.
Well, in plasma, the atoms themselves have started to break down into their component protons and electrons. That's plasma.
Okay.
So, and there's a lot of interesting conversation about plasma and plasmoids, but we don't have to get into that now. So
yeah, I was gonna say I've heard some interesting. Well, continue.
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to fast forward from here.
Yeah.
Farnsworth left Fort. His company was reorganized into a manufacturing organization to make televisions when it became commercially available in 1938. He moves to Fort Wayne, Indiana. He gets tired of that whole thing. He retreats to Maine during World War II. He has a farm and a laboratory on Maine. And the notable thing to me here, while we're kind of getting into this thread, is that I think the most notable name in science in the 1930s and 40s who was not involved in the Manhattan Project was Philo T. Farnsworth.
Wow.
Did they try to recruit him?
They did. Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's a story in the book. Have I mentioned my book, The Boy Who Invented Television? There's a story in the book about somebody who was actually working with Fermi in Chicago, who puddle jumped a plane from Chicago to Farnsworth in Maine and asked him, Farnsworth, to join them on a secret project that they were working on in Chicago.
Wow.
That was the Fermi pile. And Farnsworth thought about it, and he turned to his wife and he said, I think they're building an atomic bomb, and I want no part of it.
He knew. Okay. Wow.
Intuition. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure, because of the war and the science, the science that was coming out at the time, he knew about the race between, the Germans and the US. He probably put two and two together.
Sure.
But in the movie Oppenheimer, I don't think they mention him. I know that.
Yes.
But they don't mention him at all, right?
There's no need to. He was not part of that whole thread of history. Yeah.
Interesting.
He was in Maine. He bought a whole bunch of wooded land there, and he selectively cut the wood and milled it and made boxes for bullets.
Wow.
He milled wood and shipped it so that the military had boxes to put their bullets in when they shipped them overseas. That was his contribution to the war effort.
Interesting. And he continued his inventing
he had a laboratory there. The main facility was in Fort Wayne, Indiana. There was still a laboratory in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He got a leave of absence. He got some of his team that he still had with him to come with him to Maine. He spent even with the frigid winters in Maine, he spent the war years in Maine, and he had a laboratory there, and he experimented with multi-pactor tubes and klystron tubes, and he observed the plasma formation in the tubes. And I don't know when he started thinking about nuclear fusion, but at some time during that period, during World War II. By then, the possibility that fusion could be controlled in the same way that fission had been controlled, at least has surfaced and is part of the scientific conversation. And I think that in much the same way that he focused on television in his teens as a way to launch a career as an inventor, he decided that fusion would be a good thing to leave as his legacy. And somewhere during this period in the mid-1940s, he starts thinking about whether he can find a way to control nuclear fusion, if he can bottle the star. So,
interesting. And you think he's done it? You think he took? This is what he took to his grave.
This is what he took to his grave. Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the interesting turning points in all this, and for me, I think is quite illuminating, is that by virtue of the innate knowledge that he started with as a teenager, with the concentrating around the cosmology of things like the photoelectric effect and what came from that in the form of relativity and E equals mc squared, all of that is part of this big cosmological soup, so to speak. That's all spinning in his brain. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
No worries.
Yeah, this is the realm that he's operating in. And then he goes into his laboratories in the 1920s and 30s, and he learns more with everything that he's doing every day. I think that he had an absolutely unique perspective on this quantum realm just by virtue of his very unique experience. Starting with the photoelectric effect in his teens, the photoelectric effect was in fact the cornerstone of quantum mechanics. That's where we first begin to think of energy as being delivered in discrete packets called quanta. So he's got this unique perspective, and now he's beginning to focus that perspective on, I think it would be an interesting challenge to try to bottle the star. But now he's into a realm where he has gone beyond all known knowledge. He is literally on his own trying to sort out these cosmic forces.
Wow.
And he's still living in Maine. His company is in Fort Wayne, but they have board meetings in New York. It's a listed on the New York Stock Exchange company, Farnsworth Television and Radio, or FTR, on the New York Stock Exchange. So he's going back and forth to New York for board meetings. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the man's name, but he visits a friend in New York. And on the wall,
you froze.
Huh?
Sorry, I think you froze there for a second. Can you?
Where was it? Yep.
You said he was going down to New York for board meetings.
Right. So I should remember the name of this individual whose apartment he visited in Manhattan. And on the wall of this apartment, he sees a painted portrait of Albert Einstein. That it turns out his host's mother had painted, the only time that Einstein had ever sat long enough for somebody to paint his portrait.
Wow.
And Farnsworth says to his friend and host in New York, I've been thinking about all these rarefied concepts, all these advanced ideas. I have nobody to talk to. I wish I could talk to Einstein about it. And his friend says, well, I can arrange that. And his friend disappears into the bedroom. And he comes out a couple of minutes later and he says, I've got Einstein on the phone and he would love to talk to you.
Wow. And is this the first time that they've spoken?
The only time. This is in 1948, mind you. And this is the period when Einstein is feeling the most remorse for even his negligible involvement in the actual development of the atomic bomb, which was only suggesting to Roosevelt that it could be done. And of course, he had his own personal interest, being a refugee from Nazi Germany. But he still felt, let's just say, burdened by the fact that his ideas had been turned into such a destructive force.
So you would think that he would be on Einstein's radar at least, though, coming up with such, revolutionary technology, even though he's using it for something like the TV. That's curious to me that this is the first time that they've spoken.
The first and only time was on the phone.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Interesting.
And I'm sorry that Pam Farnsworth isn't with us anymore. I mean, she was there with him. That's Farnsworth's wife. And so he's in the bedroom talking to Einstein on the phone for something on the order of an hour. Now, you'll forgive me another cultural reference here. Have you ever seen Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston?
No, what is that?
Yes, I
Froze?
have.
Froze?
I've seen that where he drops them. He's like, we have 15. And then he drops the one tablet and goes, we have 10 commandments.
That's Monty Python. Oh, you kids. All right. The reason I like that reference is because in about 2/3 of the way into the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, Moses goes up to Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments. And when he comes down, he kind of goes up. He's this scraggly, pale, kind of weak looking guy. And he goes up and he sees the burning bush and he gets the 10 Commandments and he comes down from Mount Sinai and he looks like a tan surfer coming off the waves in California. He's all aglow and his hair is bright and glowing. And I just kind of imagine Farnsworth coming out of this bedroom like he's just, talk to God, for Christ's sakes.
Yeah, right.
And what we learned from that encounter was a couple of things without knowing the details of it, because obviously these guys were talking about stuff that you and I will never understand. But when he explained what he was doing, remember I was talking about the three ways that we figured out how to control the strong force and the fourth one is missing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's controlled fusion. And what Farnsworth told Pem that Einstein said to him was, this is the good part of my theories. You must
Wow.
continue this work.
Yeah.
So, interesting. And it's assumed that they were talking about controlled fusion.
They were talking about controlled fusion. They were talking about all the inner workings of the atoms and the many things that I have at best a peripheral grasp of that had been discovered over the prior decades about what goes on in the nucleus of an atom and the
So how could this have
enormous
died?
challenge of overcoming the repelling forces of like charged particles to get them to come together into a new particle.
Interesting, and it's just astonishing to me that something like this has died and left the consciousness of science. I mean, I feel like science sort of went off into string theory, and how is it possible that something this revolutionary has sort of just died with Einstein and Farnsworth?
To understand the mystery at the end of Farnsworth's life, you have to kind of go through the particulars of his experience in Fort Wayne, Indiana in the 1950s and 60s. So there's a story in the book, The Boy Who Invented Television. I won't bother you with pulling the cover out again, but there's a story in the book that all this stuff has been festering in his brain. Remember I told you the story about the moment of conception when he was plowing the field in 1921? And he looked behind him and he saw the rows that he had plowed in the field. And in that instant, he imagined how he could bounce electrons back and forth in a vacuum tube.
Yeah, we remember that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's called a moment of conception. And to inventors, that's the moment when a thing is invented, when you get the idea. And then it becomes a question of what we call reducing to practice, which is actually showing that the idea was valid and can work.
Prototype.
Well, there's a story in the book. They're driving across the desert in what his son called an unrefrigerated car in the summer of 1953. And Phil is slumped in the front seat and Pem is driving. He's got his hat down over his head. And he's thinking about all this shit. You know, he's talked to Einstein, and he's observed this thing in this multi-pactor tube where this gaseous blob seems to hang itself in the middle of this spherical tube. So he's got all these elements simmering, like he did with television, with electrons and magnets and cathode ray tubes. So he's got the elements simmering, and he's slumped in the back seat with his hat pulled down over his fedora pulled over his head. And then the way his son explained it to me, he just bolts out of the front seat and says, "I've got it."
Interesting. Wow.
And everybody in the car got silent because they
knew.
know they had been present for a moment of high conception.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was 1953. He spends another 6 years doing the math. And all he had at his disposal was what his son described to me as a one-armed bandit of an adding machine, something called a Monroe-matic. So it's this cylinder. It's kind of like imagine like a typewriter or something, and you enter some numbers into it, and then you pull an arm, and it runs an equation or a calculation, and gives you a result. And with
interesting.
this, he's trying to figure out how to make an artificial star.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
So
wow.
I can't even imagine. That's crazy.
So we've got the conception, we've got the development, and now we have to get to the reduction of practice. And so it's about 1958 and 1959. The mitigating circumstance here is that Farnsworth no longer controls his own destiny, because the company that was formed around his television work, which by virtue of his enormous patent portfolio should have given him the means to do whatever else he wanted with the rest of his life.
Yeah.
That company faltered after World War II.
And he probably had okay. Sorry,
Yeah.
continue.
So if that company faltered, it failed. It was eventually acquired by a conglomerate called ITT, International Telephone and Telegraph.
Mm.
And over the course of the next couple of years, they got out of the television business altogether, and Farnsworth became part of a research lab in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So when it came time to try to do something with these ideas that have been circulating in his brain, he has to turn to the board of directors of ITT in New York and ask for the money to do it. And they turned him down.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
but he had a friend there, a former admiral in the Navy named Frederick or Fritz Firth, and Firth listened a little more carefully to what he was trying to do, and Firth worked with the board of directors, and while all this is going on, Phil just becomes determined to do it himself. And he actually takes a spare bedroom in his house in Fort Wayne and starts bringing in the gear he needs to build this nuclear fusion reactor.
That's wild. Wow.
Yeah. And when I show you pictures of the actual design, you realize it's not as formidable an undertaking as it sounds like. Because when you think of a nuclear fusion or nuclear reactor, you think of these giant plants with the big smokestacks and the layers and layers of containment. This was a star in a jar. Literally, it was
interesting. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, is his family safe with this thing in the room next door? But it sounds like
that's another discussion about what are the relative dangers of fusion compared to fission. They are less by orders of magnitude, but it's not non-zero. There are elements that have to be contended with.
Right.
It's still, if nuclear fission, controlled nuclear fission is your benchmark, you can't even crawl into the seat of the bench with fusion.
Right. Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. So ITT sees him bringing this equipment and his colleagues after hours to start building a fusion lab in a spare bedroom at his home, and then they get sort of opportunistic about the whole thing. And somebody at ITT says, well, if he thinks he's got that good an idea, if he's that determined, let's give him a little bit of seed money, just enough to like get his toe in the water. So they start building a fusion lab in the Pontiac Street Laboratory in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We are kind of on the threshold now of what really happened. And I will predicate anything that we can say on that subject by it's a mystery, because
interesting.
They produced some very interesting results. So on a base level, the proof that you have fused deuterium atoms. Deuterium is a hydrogen of an isotope of hydrogen. So that's the fundamental fuel for fusion. You're trying to take hydrogen atoms and squeeze them together and they become a helium atom. The helium atom has less mass than the two hydrogen atoms had before. That difference is given off as E equals mc squared. So starting with very little mass, you get a shit ton of energy. So very early on, they start building. He names the device the Fusor, F-U-S-O-R, Fusor, and he actually starts building them in about 1958 and 59. And there are these pictures of these very small, the chamber itself is about this big. And there's a bell jar over it.
So
there's a couple of pipes and hoses going into it. That's the whole thing.
So he's building this device in order to conduct these experiments?
Yes.
Or he's building them for like mass production? This is still just experiment level.
Yeah, Understand that the difference between fission and fusion is that with fission, the energy that's going to be released is in the fuel, and all you have to do is split the fuel, and the energy is released.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
wow.
Okay, yeah. Over there on the right, if we're on the same screen, that's his fusion patent from 1968. And what you are looking at there that's the 1968 fusion patent, and there's a story about that.
Wait, go back to, let's see that. That's the patent.
And what you're seeing there, those red and purple stars, those are modern fusers that people are building today with information they get from a website that I host.
Interesting. Yep. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so he gets this seed money. He starts experimenting in a real laboratory.
Yep.
And you're saying this is where history sort of goes cold or gets dicey.
We're getting into the fuzzy zone here, and it's going to get fuzzier the farther we get into it.
Okay. Okay.
So what the point that I was making was that where the energy in fission is inherent in the fuel, the energy in fusion has to be derived by generating some energy to get the particles to come together. So you have to find some way to get them in proximity to each other and then slam them together. I like to envision a fusion reaction. You ever see two soap bubbles pop together?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what it's like, Okay. That little dividing line between them, and they just kind of pop together. Well, in order to get that to happen with atomic particles, it takes the energy that is required, some of it in the form of very high heat, to overcome the natural tendency of like-charged particles. There you go. That's you're seeing deuterium on the left there. The D, that's a hydrogen atom with one neutron. The T is a hydrogen atom with two neutrons. And you see a neutron given off there as the result of the fusion reaction. That's the evidence of fusion. That's what we're looking for when we start doing a fusion reaction. Is can we find neutrons?
Interesting.
And then energy, and a helium atom, which has two of the three neutrons that went into the equation to begin with. He starts building fusion reactors in like these fusers, the star in a jar, in around 1958. It goes through a couple of reconfigurations. They redesign the whole thing, and they start getting neutrons.
Wow.
They are generating neutrons very early on in the process.
Which is proof that it's working.
Yeah, it works. It works. They have bottled the fucking star.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we're not at the point yet, in these early periods, we're not at the point yet where we're going to get more energy. What we're looking for is what's called break even, where you get more energy coming out of the reaction than goes into the reaction to get it started.
I see.
Yeah.
And that's when it would be viable for use.
And in some configurations, there are what are called fuel cycles, which are different kinds of fuel. Like you just saw one fuel cycle, which was deuterium and tritium. There are other fuel cycles, one in particular that uses boron and hydrogen or a proton, and has very little, it doesn't even spin off neutrons. So the neutrons are, in fact, the first thing that are potentially hazardous. And there are other forms of radiation, gamma rays and X-rays that come out of this reaction too.
Sorry, I think we froze for a second here. Can you hear us, Paul?
Yeah, I hear you.
Oh, okay.
Just pause.
Let
me know when to get okay.
So do you think because of the times, because of what just happened with the atomic bomb in World War II, because of the bad taste of his mouth or in his mouth that he had with these corporations, is this why he potentially buried this technology, or is there a darker use that could come out of that of this discovery that he didn't want to get into the hands of the everyday person?
That is part of the debate. Yes.
Okay.
I am concurring with your hypothesis without being able to see into the man's mind. We're trying to make sense of the factors that lead us to the conclusion in the mid to late 1960s that he did not want the work to come to full fruition.
Right.
And you have to, there's so many questions around that. The first one is obviously, well, maybe he just ran into a dead end and he was not going to be able to get more energy out of it than he had to put into it.
Right.
My contention is, and I'm kind of fast forwarding now toward the end of the story, and it's all in the book, The Boy Who Invented Television, and then went on to create A Star in a Jar. There was a lot of friction within the laboratory. See, here's the thing. The ITT people, there's two things. The ITT people didn't want to put a dime more into this than they had to keep Farnsworth on the dole. They wanted the Atomic Energy Commission to provide all the funding. But the Atomic Energy had other priorities and didn't want to put the money into this.
Right.
So that's one factor.
Right. Right.
And that's the old version of the book. The other thing, so like I said, I've been reading. I'm going to go to one of the really interesting points here. I've reread my account of all this history just recently, and the thing that I had forgotten was that, just backing up to the conception, there's a formation inside this chamber that he's created. It's called a Poisson, which is based on a mathematical equation by a Frenchman named Poisson. That's the controlled plasma. And Farnsworth's sense was that in order for this phenomenon he called a Poisson to fully form, it had to be operated at extremely high energy levels. We're talking not kilovolts, but megavolts of energy going into it. And then everything he had been thinking about would take over and more energy would start. He was looking for a break-even point at megavolts. When he first proposed doing this research to IT&T...
I think we froze here.
Let me know when we're up.
Oh, we're up.
Okay.
Yeah, he's looking for a break-even point.
We're looking for... He knows that he has to get this thing, that the break-even point doesn't come until he operates it at an extraordinarily high level of energy, and then you get an even more extraordinary level of energy out of it. That's what he's looking for. Or at least that's my postulation, is that's what he's looking, my hypothesis. So, and what reminded me of this was that I read when I was rereading the material that when he first proposed doing this research to ITT, he knew that he had to be able to operate the device at these very high energy levels when they were going to have to contend with high levels of potentially dangerous radiation that they would eventually get control of. In order to get to those very high energy levels, he wanted to build a laboratory in isolation, and actually found some land in the California desert where he felt he could do this very high energy work safely. ITT said no.
Damn.
So all they gave him, Farnsworth wanted a facility isolated in the desert. ITT gave him a pit in a laboratory in the basement of Fort Wayne. So he never really had the opportunity. At this point, I think he's just toying with the thing. Yeah. He has his sense of what it would make it work, and he's looking for whatever evidence he can gather to prove his ideas. And then we begin to have all the misgivings because of all the corporate considerations, because his colleagues don't really understand what he's doing, because we live in the middle of the Cold War, and because, as he says to his wife at one point, there are potentially diabolical uses for such a power if it fell into the wrong hands. And the example he used was that if you had a laser beam that was powered by fusion, you could bore a hole through the moon. So he has a lot of reservations just for all of those reasons. But he wants to see. He thinks he knows it will work, but he doesn't have the facility, the means that he needs to really push it to the point where he can see what he's trying to see.
I see.
And so there's a story in the book. And here's the thing. The Farnsworth family was always very guarded about this story, this material.
Really?
And when I first met them, and honestly, there's a story about how it was really the fusion aspect of the story that was the hook to the harpoon that got me interested in all this. Mm-hmm. But when I first met them in 1975, they didn't really want to talk about it much. The son, Philo III, he talked with me about it a little bit. And as we got to know each other and became very comfortable with each other, I learned more. But I had known Pem Farnsworth for 15 years before she told me the story, which I think is the pivotal story at the end of the book. And now you don't need to read the book because I'm going to tell you how it ends.
No, I'm definitely going to buy the book after this, and I'm fascinated why they're so guarded. I mean, it just most families would celebrate their work.
It becomes a subject of hypothesis and speculation.
Right.
And I know they were Mormon too, or they eat like Did he have multiple wives? Is that maybe part of the reason why it was guarded? No.
No, this is scientific.
Being a Mormon was really not much of this story.
Okay.
So,
wait,
You never know.
sorry to backtrack. When you said it has the power to bore a hole in the moon, this is part of the reason that he was initially guarded about this specific invention. Or I missed that sentence. It froze a little bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he was trying to imagine how fusion. He imagined the whole world on an entirely different scale of energy at its disposal, orders of magnitude more than we have now. Because we're burning fossil fuels. Everything is based on chemical reactions, including the way we get into space.
Right.
He was going to do with nuclear energy what cavemen did with fire.
Right.
And it was going to be on a much higher order of energy.
I see.
And so the only way I have from my experience with the family to articulate the kind of thing that he was talking about was that if that energy was applied with a laser beam, for example, that laser beam could be made so powerful with fusion energy that it could burn a hole through the moon. Now, how else that could be weaponized? It's you really don't even want to think about it. It's hard to imagine. One of the problems that I have when we get into this, what I'm calling the fuzzy realm here, is it's hard to imagine what could be worse than a hydrogen bomb.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I think he was saying that controlled, it could be applied in directed ways that could be more diabolically, deliberately precision applied, to use a common term, precision bombing and things like that. So
right.
He definitely had some reluctance about whether mankind was ready for this potential.
Oh, and for good reason. I mean, because I don't think mankind is ready for it. Until war is a thing of the past. I think that's
why we can't have good things.
Exactly. That's why it's great that you're speaking at this conference, because I'd love to hear how it ties into the theories of ancient technology. But anyway, I don't want to get us off track. Because we're almost at the good part.
Yeah, we're almost at the good part. We are. We're right at the good part, in fact, because there are stories, about Farnsworth being disengaged from the work in the fusion lab and coming up with ideas that were ridiculous, and there are a lot of sides to the story here, depending on who you talk to. But he was involved when he wanted to be, and the story that Pam finally told me after I had known her for 15 years, and I was spending some time with her in Salt Lake City. She was now putting the finishing touches on the book that she had started writing when I met her in 1975. And so now it's like 1989. We're finishing this book that she's written. And her younger son, Kent, who was about my age, we kind of sat her down on a sofa. And I'm trying to picture this now because it's still fairly vivid. And we got her to begin opening up about some of the things that he confided in her about what was going on in the fusion lab. And then she told the story of the night they returned to the lab. Now, remember what I said a minute ago, that he was constrained because he was not able to operate the fuser in the environment that it was in at the energy potentials he felt it needed to be operated at to see the true potential of the Poisson formation at the center of it.
Right.
So he tells a story. Pam tells me the story after I've known her for 15 years. She tells me the night he came back from the laboratory in the late afternoon, and he has this quizzical look on his face. And Pam asks him, "What's up?" And he says, "We made a run today." That's what they called the tests with the fuser, a run. "We made a run today. And the results were very interesting. I want you to see this." So they have dinner, and they go back to the laboratory after dark when there's nobody else there but the one guard at the gate. And so to me, it's like, it's this Spielbergian scene of sneaking into the laboratory at night.
And she was there. She was there physically.
Phil fires up the fuser down in the pit where they'd left it after the run during that day. So it's out of any danger zone.
Uh-huh.
And let me see if I can remember exactly how the story goes. So he's got like throttles. He's pumping voltages, current into the thing. And he's got, I think, one handle that controls the voltage and one handle that controls the current. So you got the voltage and the amps. And we're talking about milliamps here. And you want to have higher voltage and lower amps because I think that's where the magic starts to happen. And the way Pem described it was, she's sitting at the console watching the meters, and he's at the controls, and she's calling out to him the activity on the needles. And she says they've reached a point where they're at about 3/4. And then he pushes the throttles up a little farther, and the needles jump off the scale. And then he pulls the throttles back.
Wow.
And the needles stayed pegged.
Oh.
For about 30 seconds.
Wow. There you go.
So what does that mean?
That means if it means what I think it meant, it means he had demonstrated to himself that the reaction was capable of sustaining itself with fuel going into it, but continuing to sustain itself, a controlled fusion reaction, and that it could generate so much energy that it was like the analogy that I use is a starter motor on an automobile engine. So I've got a Mustang GT in my garage that has a 450 horsepower V8 engine. But you know what I started with? A 2 horsepower electric starter motor.
I see.
So what we witnessed was analogous to starting the 2 horsepower starter motor and kicking the 450 horsepower V8 engine into gear. And I think that's what he witnessed that night.
Okay,
he turns to his wife and he says, "This is the critical line of dialogue I left out." After the needles finally start falling back, he says, "It's like you've taken the fuel out of it now, so it's going to die off." He says, "That's all I need to see. Let's go home."
And did he explain this to her at all?
No. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So we are now at the far end of the fuzzy zone here, where I will make the case, and it's recognizing that it's a high degree of speculation on my part, that he proved to himself that the conception that he had when he bolted out of the car seat in the desert in 1953 was a viable approach to nuclear fusion, that he had reservations about releasing it on the world, that he proved to himself that it was a viable concept, and then left the work unfinished. When I asked his son Philo III about that, he said, I'd heard a story that he had left the work unfinished. And the way Philo answered that was, he said the patents were incomplete.
What does that mean?
So what that means is, what a patent is supposed to do is it is supposed to, it's like an instruction manual. A patent should give anybody who is conversant in the art the ability to build the device disclosed therein.
So he found out something, he discovered something new.
He discovered, there was something.
He never patented it.
Right. He left that something new out of the patent.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
and that's when his experiments sort of go cold. He nothing sort of comes of this.
Nope.
Wow.
He basically begins to pull himself out of the work after that night. And there's some stories about that. And there was one startup attempt later in Salt Lake City that never got off the ground. I think he was sandbagging the entire time.
Interesting.
Yep.
And there's so many similarities to Townsend Brown too. And wow. You did do such an excellent job of telling the story too, because I don't know, the way you solidified how creative and genius a thinker he was, and to leave his work with no finale, no finish. He didn't write anything about it. It's just so mysterious, you know? Like has anyone else, has any other scientist sort of picked up where he left off, or what has happened to this movement?
So while if you want, pull up the website fusor.net. That's FUSOR.net.
Okay, FUSOR.net.
The approach that Farnsworth was using, that he pioneered really, is called inertial electrostatic containment. Containment being the idea of you're holding this thing in a small space. And I describe it as using the inherent qualities of the particles to hold themselves together internally, inertially. Most of the work that's being done with fusion today is external forces trying to force these particles together rather than using their own magic to pull them into proximity. And there is still work being done in inertial electrostatic containment, but on a much reduced scale from what Farnsworth envisioned. And those people all gather at the website that I host, that I started in 1998, called fusor.net. And so if you pull that site up and then go to where it says forums at the top, you'll see the conversations between dozens of people around the world who are building small-scale, underpowered nuclear fusion reactors in their basements and garages.
So does this have anything to do with the cold fusion reactor? Like I heard there was a breakthrough in science recently where they were able to actually create some kind of reaction at room temperature as opposed to at freezing temperatures. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. It's not an area that I have gone into. Yeah, if you see where it says forums at the top there? I need to change that to 60 years in the past. I put that up 10 years ago.
Yeah, go to forums.
Yeah. Yeah, there it is. So these are the people who are sharing. There's an enormous database here. This site has been up for 25 years.
Wow.
And if ever the secret is actually revealed, these are the people who will be able to bring it to the people.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, when we talk about the fuzzy area and we speculate about why he didn't want this released, I think that one of the implications of what you see here is that actually the secret is not all that complicated. Fusion is actually pretty easy if you know what to do. And these people, they're learning the skill sets, like somebody who's a backyard mechanic and can build a V8 engine or build their own cars or whatever. They're learning the skill sets. And my speculation, hypothesis is that if and when mankind ever crosses this threshold, that we're going to be availed of a technology that is kind of do it yourself. And these are the people who are doing it themselves. But they are doing it on a very small and very safe scale, not at the scale that Farnsworth believed was required to get the great quantities of energy out of it that we need.
This is great that there's forums like this. I found on TikTok, the social media app, there's a whole community of crazy inventors, and a lot of them get banned, which is suspicious. But there's these kids that are doing crazy experiments with electricity in their backyard, and someone who created gasoline out of plastic and all this cool stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of a new avenue for science, because mainstream science is pretty restricted. Maybe the next breakthrough inventor will be someone like this. Yeah. Or someone on your forum like this,
Well, it's not unreasonable that you could get some kind of fuel out of plastic because it's petroleum based.
I'll send you this guy. It's fascinating.
I avoid social media. I am not on TikTok. Don't make me go. I'll bring it up on the web once in a while if there's something I need to see, but I don't have the app on my phone. So.
Well, I'll send you a video. There's another guy named Parker something who's sort of recreating the Tesla experiments. It just interesting stuff.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff out there. Remember the epigraph that starts the Townsend Brown biography is from a seminal science fiction writer named Eden Philpotts, who said, "The world is filled with magical things, patiently waiting for your wits to grow sharper."
Yeah, and that all ties into, like you were talking about, the moment of clarity when the invention planted itself into the 14-year-old boy's head. That happens with genius musicians, inventors, and I think there's something to that where consciousness, you can sort of work as a channel to get brilliant ideas. I mean, that's happened to me before, where an idea sort of just boom.
Yeah, I've never had a moment of conception of myself, but I've seen a conception, so I can kind of relate to that because when I got to know Philo T. Farnsworth III, now that's the oldest son born in 1929. He was still alive when I met the family. And he and I had some very interesting experiences together, and I got very close to him and still consider that one of the most important friendships I had in my life.
Wow.
And he was an inventor in his own right, but again, in part because of his experience of seeing how being in that arena had affected his father, he was reticent, he was reserved, he was hesitant to put his ideas in the world. They weren't anything like what his father was, but they were original ideas. And one of the ideas he had was for a spherical dwelling. He called it the Yantra house. He was into Buddhism. And central to this construction was a beam design that he came up with. And it was like an extraction. And I'm not going to do it justice, but he had found a way to fabricate the extractions in such a way that its strength would persist throughout the length of the beam, however long it was cantilevered. So it had as much strength out here as it had here.
Interesting.
You know what I mean?
Interesting.
And he showed me the drawing of that one night at his lab in Bolinas, California. And I had one of those moments of clarity where I saw a drawing of something that did not exist in the world, but I could see from the sketch that it was real.
Wow.
So I kind of know what you're talking about when you have an idea and you think, I think that'll work. And suddenly things shift a little bit because you see things differently. And that's what I think his experience was.
Did that design ever come to fruition? Like, I feel like, wow.
Are you looking for Bolinas?
He's pulling up random stuff. I'm curious.
Yeah, okay, I got a Bolinas story. Let's get off the heavy shit, and I'll just tell you a quick Bolinas story. So you can see how Bolinas is like out there at the edge of civilization, outside of Marin County, in Northern California, outside of San Francisco. When I was there in 1975, 75 to 78 thereabouts, I visited there a few times. It was one of the last redoubts of the 1960s.
Oh, I think we froze.
It's where the old hippies went to hang out. And they had something called the Bolinas Border Patrol. And I think Philo gave me a T-shirt once, and I wish I still had it. It said Bolinas Border Patrol across it. And what the Bolinas Border Patrol did was every now and then the state of California would put a sign out on the highway that said, "This way to Bolinas." And the Bolinas Border Patrol would go out at night and take the signs down.
Just to keep tourists out? That's funny.
Keep tourists out.
Yeah, that's great. That's funny.
Yeah, I've been to Stinson Beach, so I've been.
Yeah.
close.
You have?
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
I met some real interesting people there.
So one quick connection I want to see if we can make. Townsend Brown, he was working on gravity.
Yeah, gravity control.
Phil was working on fusion. Fusion, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm getting those mixed up.
We need to go back to your question about cold fusion, but stay on this train for now.
Gravity, you're saying, is the last frontier. We haven't cracked.
Right. That's the other missing fourth.
The missing fourth. I want to get back to the missing fourth.
Yeah.
So we haven't cracked the star in a jar yet, or the missing fourth, which is gravity. Is that what you're going to be focusing on at this? What do you call it? Seminar?
I'm going to try to make the case. Yeah, and I might have to use that whole missing fourths thing. And this is where there's another angle to this, where I do think that by whatever means and from whatever source, popular culture is doing all that it can to show mankind what is possible in that universe of magical things.
It is. Yeah, you're right.
And the example that comes most readily to mind, and I've got the footage on my website. You know, if you go to youtube.com/driver49 and look for the Back to the Future footage, maybe you can pull that up and put it on for us.
Yeah, let's do that.
It's that last scene in Back to the Future. Can you take a minute and see if you can find that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Give me like 1 minute to pull up your YouTube channel.
Yeah, it's worth. It shouldn't. You know, I think it's youtube.com/driver49. Then you should see the few videos that I put up there, and scroll down a bit to sometime last year, and you'll see a picture of Doc Brown from Back to the Future.
You know, so
here we go. Okay, yeah. Keep going. There it is. Bring that up.
Yeah, let's play this.
Yeah, make it full screen. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Oh, can you get the audio?
Yeah, 1 second.
Can you get the audio here?
Watch this.
Wait a minute. What are you doing, Doc?
Look what he's got.
Yeah.
One of the best movie endings of all time.
And that's the end.
That's great.
That's how the movie ends. So there's 3 things there that I think somebody's trying to tell us something. So the first is, remember early in the movie, he needs to steal plutonium in order to power the time travel device. And what is the time travel device called?
The Endorium? What's it called?
I don't know.
I forget. Yeah, I haven't seen it in so long.
It's the flux capacitor.
Oh yeah, the flux capacitor. You're right.
And what was Townsend Brown's technology? The Biefeld-Brown effect. It was a capacitor.
Right. Oh,
Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
So now he comes back from the future, and he no longer needs plutonium to power his DeLorean time machine with the flux capacitor. He's got a fusion reactor on the back of it.
Oh, and he can just put a bunch of random
some random stuff that you take the water out of and turn it into hydrogen and make it into, boom. And then the crab, where we're going, we don't need roads because we just levitate the thing with our gravity control effect and take off through time from there.
Interesting.
So you've got all those elements in that little snippet of film, and then the final one, which is somebody's trying to tell us something. What is Doc Brown's actual name?
I don't know. What is it?
His name is Emmett Brown. Emet Brown.
Wow. I never even noticed that.
That's my case. We're done here.
What is the?
I didn't know that.
I've seen other things about the Back to the Future series again. What's the director's name? Their screenwriter?
Robert Zemeckis.
Yeah, Zemeckis. Yeah, Robert Zemeckis. There's a lot out there about him predicting the future and other things too.
You know what? I think that these technologies have been created. There is something that's keeping them from being revealed until the human race is evolved enough to take them on. Because otherwise, we would destroy ourselves. That's my theory.
And I agree. And I feel like I've had this privilege because of this curious predisposition to see what some very powerful elements of that future are. And I can see how they make the argument that this species has not reached the point of maturity where we're ready for the keys to this cosmic Ferrari.
Yeah, I mean, look at the world today, and imagine throwing something like time travel or crafts that can move at whatever you want to say.
Yeah,
I think it could make things worse if the wrong people had their hands on it, or it could heal and fix everything if the right people.
Well, yeah, that's the chicken and egg thing. Which comes first? Or are we living in this violent, contentious world because of limited resources? And if we suddenly have unlimited resources, will we be able to behave ourselves, or do we have to learn to behave ourselves with what we have and distribute it in a way that benefits a larger segment of the population before we begin to get access to these higher technologies.
Right. I mean, think about an advanced civilization. They have to be peaceful, empathetic, understanding, cooperative in order to have advanced technology. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist. Right?
And I think we're at that threshold. And I think we talked about this a little bit in the first session, the idea, and you addressed this too earlier when you were saying something about string theory and how that seems to have been a tangential dead end to advanced physics.
Yeah.
And I've heard this fellow Eric Weinstein talk about an idea that also came up in the 1950s called quantum gravity. And he says that quantum gravity is like a startup that hasn't delivered its first product in 70 years. It's another dead end. Quantum gravity being the idea that gravity too is transmitted in some kind of particle called a graviton. And that all came out during that period in the 50s. And so there is this argument, the speculation to have that we were talking about earlier, that great advances of science like we saw at the beginning of the 20th century started to drop off in the middle of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And what happened in the middle of the 20th century that might give our fountain of knowledge pause? Can you think of anything?
Yeah, I can. Yep. Yeah. World War II.
Yeah.
The nuclear bomb.
The whole World War II, and then the way it ended.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
they're out there. They're just thinking that's enough.
It all ties into all the weird UFO activity around nuclear sites. I mean, there's a million ways, a million directions you can sort of take this, which is it's fascinating. And I hope one day we know the answer.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I don't know if we're going to wind down now. We've spent an hour and a half on this one and an hour on the other one. I'm going to start running out of things to say here pretty soon.
Well, we got to we'll end this, but we'd love to have you back on. Maybe we'll type up a list of some different topics we can delve into. But Paul, thank you very much. You are a fascinating person to talk to. We'll put your book information in the description.
Yeah, just email and publish it this weekend.
And we're gonna put out a bunch of clips of this. And the last episode was received very positively. So we love speaking.
Yeah,
with you.
I've got some. I haven't had the time. I've got some software where I can.
Oh wait. No, wait. Shut off this music. Sorry, we cut you off there.
You spelled my name wrong on that graphic that just went by. You left the K out of Schatzkin.
Oh, no, get the K. Yeah, we'll fix that. We're not live, so we can edit that.
Okay. So are we done recording?
We're still recording, but we can edit the end part out.
Yeah. So I'm ready to wrap up. I do hope I can get. I was going to say I will also try to generate some clips from this because I've gotten into some material here that I have not really gotten into in some of these other conversations that I've had. So I want to put some of that stuff up, and I thank you for the opportunity to do that.
Use any of it.
Yeah, we'll send you this full video, and if you want to send us some graphics or anything you want us to add into this,
let me get that to you tomorrow morning or something. I'll send you some pictures of some of the fusion stuff that I've got from that area, and you can see it really triggers some thinking.
Awesome.
I'll give you an analogy. When I first learned of Philo Farnsworth, it was in this magazine called Video Software or Radical Software from San Francisco, and what I saw in it that triggered me were all these images of television prehistory that I'd never seen before.
Interesting.
And it dawned on me, that I had no knowledge of what television was before it got into our living rooms. And when I show you some of these pictures of the fusion technology that Farnsworth was developing in the 50s and 60s, it has that same kind of quality to it. Like it's something we might look back on in 100 years as the prehistory of a fusion-powered world.
Wow. Awesome. Yeah, that would be great to add into this. That would be great.
Yeah, and Paul, when you leave the call, it'll just ask you to keep the app open to finish uploading
Yeah,
it.
we had some trouble with that last time. We weren't sure if it had recorded.
Yeah, it will.
Thought.
Yeah, thank you though. We appreciate
So yeah,
you.
if you can send me the video and or the separated audio, that would be great.
Yeah, I can send both.
Yeah,
later
we'll send
tomorrow.
both.
Yeah,
Right,
thank
all right.
you,
So
Paul.
I'll wait here until you tell me I can go.
You can go now, and then it just might have you keep the app open.
You guys are frozen.
You can go. Oh, here, I'll just kick him
No,
out.
don't. It's just still recording on my side.
Hold on, here we go. This is how we.
All right.
All
Now
right.
it says 99% uploading.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. All right, and so that was Paul Farnsworth. We are going to do our outro song by Grand Daniel. We still haven't gotten a new one. It's called Ohio. Should I keep talking or no? Nah. Ohio is not a great outro song, apparently. If you're a Pickle Walks, formerly known as Grand Daniel fan, give us some recommendations for a new outro song. Until then, we're going to be doing the one we've been doing. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Looney Raccoony. We do have some questions. We are aware and on to their potential use of slave labor at Looney Raccoony, so we're going to look into that. If it turns out that basement video of them doing child slaves is real, we're going to end our relationship with them. You can check out Shep's Liquor Cabinet for the best liquor in town. We're also sponsored by Shure Microphone and the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. campaign. We are also sponsored by the Taos Ski Resort and the 2023 World Cup that occurred there. If you're still listening to the end of this, none of these sponsors may or may not be real. But yeah, until then, we'll have a new outro song soon. Any last words, Wall Street bitch?
Thank you, Paul. I want to talk to him more.
Yeah, Paul, we thank you. You'll be back on. And here's our current outro song. Wait, this is the intro again.
He's like, you spelled my name.
Yeah.
And I sing to the ones within me, and I sing to the ones without.
Open your brains and follow.
As my river flows down the train track, all I know